At 5:25 on a Tuesday morning, I stood behind my townhouse pressing the garage remote over and over, while the steel gate at the end of the service court refused to move. The little light on the control box flashed red.
As Section 4, Subsection B clearly states, this gate must remain locked.
Same result.
The board's decision is
final.
final.
My pickup was sitting 10 feet behind me inside the garage. My tools were loaded. I had a job scheduled across town before 7, and somehow, overnight, the HOA had decided I was no longer allowed to drive out of my own property. I walked toward the gate and saw 2 large concrete planters positioned on either side of the opening. They had not been there the night before. A private security SUV was parked beside the control cabinet, and one of the guards was standing near the pedestrian gate with a clipboard. Then I saw Vivian Cross. She was already there in a dark pink business suit and high heels, her hair pinned neatly back, holding a folder like she had been expecting me. Vivian was 56 and had been HOA president for almost 2 years. She had a way of turning every board decision into something that sounded final before anyone had a chance to question it. She informed me that the rear service court had been reclassified as an emergency access-only lane. I asked her how I was supposed to get my truck out of my garage. She told me vehicle access now required HOA authorization. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood her. The garage was mine. The pickup was mine. The service court was the only practical route between my garage door and the public street. But according to Vivian, I now needed permission from the board every time I wanted to use the driveway area behind my own home. I asked her to open the gate once so I could get to work. She refused. Then she warned me not to touch the control box or attempt to force the gate because the system was now considered emergency infrastructure. That was the moment I stopped being confused and started getting angry. I took out my phone and photographed everything. The gate, the planters, the security vehicle, the warning sticker, the control panel, and the contractor label mounted on the metal enclosure. That was when I noticed something strange. There was a blank field on the installation sticker where an inspection or permit number should have been written. Nothing. No approval number. No inspection date. No initials. I asked Vivian who had ordered the change. She told me the fire department required the HOA to restrict access so emergency vehicles could use the rear lane without obstruction. That sounded serious enough that I backed off. I was not going to interfere with anything connected to fire safety. So I left my pickup in the garage, called my customer to say I would be late, and took a rideshare to work. For the next 2 days, I assumed Vivian was telling the truth. Then I received the HOA notice. It called my garage access a safety issue. It threatened fines if I attempted unauthorized vehicle entry. And it referenced a fire department directive without giving a date, an inspection number, a case number, or the name of the official who supposedly issued it. That was the first moment something felt wrong. Because if the fire department had really ordered the HOA to lock me out of my own garage, there should have been a record. And when I went looking for that record, I discovered something Vivian had never expected me to check. The fire department had not ordered that gate at all. I bought the townhouse 6 years earlier, and the garage was one of the main reasons I chose it. I had been divorced for almost 2 years and wanted something simple. I did not need a big yard, a pool, or a clubhouse. I wanted a quiet place, a manageable mortgage, and a secure garage. I worked as a residential electrical technician, which meant I carried expensive tools every day. Meters, drills, testers, wire-pulling equipment, replacement parts, and boxes of hardware lived in my pickup most weeks. I never ran a business from home. I just needed somewhere safe to keep my truck and tools. The townhouse gave me exactly that. My garage sat behind the house, facing a paved rear service court. That court connected the row of garages to a public street. There was no second driveway. If I wanted to put a vehicle into my garage, I used that rear court. If I wanted to leave, I used the same route. That was how the property had been designed from the beginning. For 6 years, nobody questioned it. I paid my HOA dues. I followed the parking rules. I kept the garage door in the approved color. I rarely attended board meetings because I had no reason to. Then Vivian Cross became HOA president. After residents complained about package theft and unfamiliar vehicles using the rear court as a shortcut, Vivian announced a security improvement project. At first, it sounded reasonable. Better lighting, cameras, access control. Even a gate seemed fine as long as garage owners could still use it normally. That was what I assumed. 3 weeks before I was locked out, The HOA sent a notice saying contractors would perform temporary access control work behind the townhouses. Nothing said residents would lose vehicle access. Nothing said the court was becoming emergency only. Nothing mentioned the fire department. So when contractors installed wiring, steel posts, and a control cabinet, I thought it was a normal security upgrade. Then the gate appeared. Then the concrete planters. Then my remote stopped working. And suddenly Vivian was telling me I needed HOA permission to drive into the garage I had used normally for 6 years. If you have ever dealt with an HOA that describes a major restriction as a minor improvement, you understand why I stopped trusting summaries and started asking for documents. A phrase like security upgrade means very little until you know what was actually approved. The morning after I was locked out, I emailed management and requested 3 things: the fire department directive, the board resolution, and the approval for the gate configuration. Management sent only the board resolution. It referred to emergency access concerns and community safety, but it never said the fire department ordered a gate. It never said garage owners had to be blocked. It never said the rear court had to become emergency only. That afternoon, I received another email. Unauthorized vehicle access violation. The notice warned that trying to drive through the rear court without HOA authorization could result in fines. At the bottom, it referenced a fire department directive. No date, no inspection number, no case number, no official's name. Vivian was threatening to fine me based on an order she still had not shown me. That was when I stopped asking whether the rule was inconvenient. I started asking whether the order existed at all. The first thing I did was send Vivian the same request again. I wanted the fire department directive she kept citing. Not a summary. Not a board resolution. Not an HOA interpretation. The actual directive. I also asked for the permit tied to the gate installation and any approved plan showing that the rear service court had been converted into an emergency-only lane. Her reply came less than an hour later. She did not attach a fire directive. She did not attach an inspection report. She sent the same board resolution management had already given me and told me the association had acted on professional safety guidance. That phrase was new. Professional safety guidance. It was not the same thing as an order. I saved the email. Then I checked my access fob. The service gate beside the vehicle entrance still had a reader, and residents used the same system for several controlled areas around the property. My credential had worked for years. Now it did not. I called management and asked whether the fob had malfunctioned. The manager told me it had been deactivated as part of the new access policy. That mattered. This was not a random system failure. Someone had intentionally removed my access. I asked who authorized it. She said the change had been approved through the board president's administrative account. Vivian. By then, my pickup had been trapped in the garage for 3 days. I had borrowed a coworker's spare van once, used ride shares twice, and rearranged 2 jobs because the tools I needed were sitting behind a gate I was apparently not authorized to drive through. I emailed Vivian again. I asked how a homeowner with a legal garage was supposed to use it under the new policy. Her answer was that owners could submit access requests for essential vehicle movement. I read that sentence several times. Submit a request to enter my own garage. The HOA had turned a permanent part of my home into something I could only use by appointment. I told her that was not acceptable. She responded that emergency access took priority over individual convenience. That word irritated me more than anything else she had written. Convenience. I was not asking to park a recreational vehicle in a fire lane. I was asking to use the only driveway leading to the garage attached to my property rights. Then the HOA made it worse. 4 days after the gate went active, I came home from work in a borrowed van and noticed the landscaper inside the rear court. The steel gate was open. A maintenance pickup was already through it. For the first time all week, there was a clear path to my garage. My own truck was still inside. I made a decision that seemed completely reasonable. I drove the borrowed van into the rear court long enough to unload a toolbox and check the garage. I did not block the lane. I did not park. I was inside for less than 10 minutes. The next morning, I received another violation notice. The HOA camera had recorded my vehicle entering during what they called an unauthorized access window. The notice accused me of obstructing emergency access. That was when the logic stopped making any sense. The gate was open. The landscaper was inside. A maintenance truck was inside. I had been there for minutes, yet somehow I was the safety violation. I asked Vivian how a vehicle could be considered an obstruction while HOA contractors were being admitted through the same lane. She replied that authorized service vehicles were part of approved community operations. Homeowner access, she said, had to be controlled. I saved that email too. Then I started looking more closely at the physical layout. The steel gate itself was not the only new installation. 2 large concrete planters had been positioned close to the opening, apparently to stop cars from driving around the gate. Before the project, the rear court had a broad entrance. Now the usable width looked noticeably smaller. I had no idea what width was required for emergency vehicles, and I was not going to pretend I knew fire code. So I measured it only for my records. I photographed the tape measurement. I photographed the planter locations. I photographed the gate fully open. A few days later, a garbage truck tried to enter. The driver slowed, lined up, then stopped. He backed out and left. That got my attention. If the entire purpose of the project was emergency access, why had the entrance become harder for a large truck to use? I went back to the contractor label on the control box. There was a company name and phone number. I called. I kept the conversation simple. I gave them the property address and asked whether they had installed the gate. They confirmed they had. I asked if the system had already passed the fire inspection Vivian kept referring to. The person on the phone paused. Then, she told me their company had installed the system, according to the customer's approved layout and electrical scope, but final fire access approval would depend on the authority having jurisdiction and whatever review the project required. That answer was careful, but it told me something important. The contractor was not claiming the fire department had ordered the gate. I asked whether there was a permit number attached to the project. She gave me a job reference number, but she would not discuss HOA documents with me. That was fair. I took the reference number and searched the city's online permit portal. The first result surprised me. There was a permit connected to electrical work for the gate system, conduit, power supply, control equipment. That part existed. What I could not find was anything approving the change to the emergency access configuration itself. No fire access modification. No obvious approval for narrowing the entrance with planters. No record saying homeowners had to be locked out. I searched under the HOA name, the property address, the contractor, the job reference. Still nothing that matched Vivian's claim. I did not assume that meant there was no approval. Online permit systems can be incomplete. Records can be filed under different categories. So I emailed the city and asked for the relevant fire prevention and site access records. At the same time, I requested a copy of the original site plan for the development. That was when Vivian escalated again. A formal notice was taped to my front door. The HOA was now imposing a monetary fine for unauthorized vehicle access. The notice warned that repeated violations could result in additional fines and suspension of certain association privileges. I had been blocked from my garage, then fined for briefly entering the lane while the gate was already open. Now the HOA was threatening to stack penalties on top of a restriction it still had not proven came from the fire department. I emailed the board, not just Vivian. I asked one question: who, specifically, at the fire department had ordered resident vehicle access restricted? No one answered. Instead, Vivian sent a message saying the board would not debate emergency safety policy with individual homeowners. That sentence changed my approach. I stopped arguing with the HOA. I started collecting records. The first useful record did not come from the board. It came from the city permit portal. The electrical permit had a project description. I had overlooked it the first time. It did not call the installation an emergency access system. It called it what it really was: residential security gate and access control upgrade. Security gate. Not fire department mandate. Not emergency-only conversion. Not a safety order. Just a security project. I printed the page. Then, I opened the HOA's original notice from 3 weeks earlier. It had used almost the same language. Access control improvement. Somewhere between the original project and the day my remote stopped working, Vivian had changed the explanation. The project had started as security. Now she was calling it fire safety. And the more I looked at the records, the less those two stories matched. 2 days later, the city sent me a response to my records request. They had located the original development site plan. They had also located the fire access drawing associated with the rear court, and they told me there was no fire department directive in the file ordering the HOA to lock homeowners out. That was the first real break in the story Vivian had been telling. But the city added something else. Because I had described a newly installed gate and concrete planters across a designated rear access route, the fire prevention office wanted photographs. I sent them everything. The full gate opening, the planter positions, the control cabinet, the blank inspection field, and the notice claiming the fire department had required the change. The reply came the next morning. A fire prevention official wanted to inspect the site. For the first time since my truck had been trapped in the garage, I was not trying to convince Vivian of anything. Someone with actual authority over fire access was coming to look at the gate she kept hiding behind. The original site plan arrived as a scanned PDF from the city records office. At first, it looked like the kind of document most homeowners would never read unless they were buying, building, or suing someone. Lines, dimensions, setbacks, turning radiuses, utility notes, fire access markings. I opened it on my laptop and zoomed in on the rear service court behind my townhouse. The garages were clearly shown. So was the route connecting them to the public street. The lane behind the building was not drawn as some optional service path that could be closed whenever the HOA wanted. It was part of the approved site configuration. I kept scrolling. Then, I found the fire access overlay. The same rear route was marked as part of the emergency access system for the development. That did not mean every homeowner had unlimited rights to block it. It did not mean residents could park wherever they wanted. But it did mean something important. The city had approved the rear court with a specific width, a specific turning area, and a specific relationship to the garages. The gate project had changed that physical setup. I printed the relevant pages. Then I requested the building records for my unit. Those documents were even more useful. My garage had been permitted as a vehicular garage. The plans showed vehicle access from the rear court. There was no second driveway, no alternate route, no front access. The garage was not some storage room that happened to have a large door. It had been approved to receive vehicles from the lane Vivian had just restricted. That did not instantly answer every HOA question, but it made her position harder to understand. She was treating the only approved vehicular access to multiple garages as though it were a privilege the board could turn on and off. I added those records to the folder. Then I started looking at the HOA's own explanation for the project. I requested board minutes, contractor proposals, insurance correspondence, and anything involving the phrases fire access, emergency lane, security gate, or rear court. Management responded slowly. The first packet contained meeting minutes and a few vendor proposals. The early records were almost boring. Residents complained about package theft. A few people reported unfamiliar vehicles cutting through the rear court. Vivian proposed cameras and access controls. One vendor suggested a gated system. Another suggested license plate monitoring. At that stage, nobody described the project as a fire department requirement. Nobody said garage owners would lose vehicle access. Nobody used the phrase, emergency-only lane. That language appeared later. The shift happened after the board received a risk control email from the HOA's insurance consultant. I read that email carefully. The consultant had reviewed several community concerns and recommended that the association keep designated emergency access routes clear of parked vehicles and other obstructions. That was it. Keep the lane clear. The email did not order a gate. It did not recommend deactivating homeowner credentials. It did not say residents should be required to request permission before entering their garages. It did not say the fire department had directed any of those things. I searched the attachment for references to the city. There were none. Yet in a board update 2 weeks later, Vivian summarized the issue by saying, emergency access requirements made unrestricted resident use unacceptable. That was a much stronger statement than the insurer had made. In the next meeting, the language got stronger again. According to the minutes, Vivian told the board that the rear court had to be controlled to satisfy fire access concerns. One board member asked whether garage owners would still be able to use the lane. The minutes recorded Vivian's answer as temporary managed access. There was no explanation of what that meant. There was no vote specifically authorizing permanent lockout. I checked the actual motion. The board had approved funding for a security access control project. That was all. The motion authorized equipment, installation, and management of credentials. It did not say existing garage access rights were terminated. It did not reclassify the lane. It did not authorize fines for using the only route to a private garage. The more I read, the more the project seemed to have changed after the vote. I requested the access control logs. Management resisted at first, saying the logs contained security information. My attorney narrowed the request to my own credential and the administrative action that disabled it. A few days later, we received a short export. My fob had not expired. It had not failed. It had been deactivated manually. The action was recorded under an administrator account assigned to the HOA president, Vivian. The timestamp was 9:18 the night before. I found myself trapped behind the gate. That detail mattered because Vivian had described my lockout as part of a system-wide emergency access transition. The logs showed it was not automatic. Someone had chosen my credential. Someone had turned it off. I checked several other garage owners I knew. 2 had also lost regular vehicle access. One elderly resident had been told to call management in advance if his son needed to move his car. Another homeowner had started leaving her vehicle on the street because she did not want to argue with the board every time she needed the garage. That told me the problem was broader than my unit. But I still did not know whether the physical gate itself complied with the approved fire access plan. For that, I needed the contractor specifications. The contractor would not give them directly to me. My attorney requested the project documents through the HOA. Eventually, we received the equipment package. I went through it slowly. Gate motor, control board, vehicle sensor, keypad, credential reader, power supply, emergency release options. The technical language was familiar enough for me to follow because of my electrical work. What caught my attention was the power failure setting. The gate was configured to remain secured unless a specific release input was triggered. I searched for documentation showing a fire department override tied into the system. I could not find it. There was a section for emergency operation. It was incomplete. Another page referenced field coordination with the authority having jurisdiction. No signed approval was attached. Then I found the layout drawing. The concrete planters were shown. The opening dimension between them was narrower than the clear width shown on the original city-approved access plan. I measured the difference twice. I did not pretend that meant I had discovered a code violation. I was not a fire marshal. I was not a traffic engineer. But I knew enough to recognize that the installed configuration did not match the original plan. That was exactly why the fire prevention office wanted to inspect it. The next document was an email between the contractor and management. The contractor had asked whether final fire access review had been completed before activation. Management forwarded the question to Vivian. Her reply said the system needed to go live on schedule and remaining documentation could be handled afterward. I read that sentence 3 times. That was the first record showing Vivian had been warned before activation that something was still unfinished. Not necessarily illegal, not necessarily fatal to the project, but unfinished, and she activated it anyway. A later contractor email asked again about emergency override coordination. This time there was no response in the packet. I added both emails to the timeline. Then, I went back to the board minutes. Another strange sequence appeared. The original motion approved a security upgrade. After installation, Vivian began referring to a fire safety requirement. After residents complained about lost garage access, she described the restrictions as mandatory. After I asked for the fire department directive, the language shifted again to professional safety guidance. Each version sounded slightly different. Each version was harder to verify than the last. I requested the exact city record Vivian had relied on. Management sent nothing. My attorney sent a formal request asking whether the HOA possessed any written directive, inspection notice, email, or order from the fire department requiring the new restrictions. The response came from the association's management company. They could not locate one. That was the moment the story changed. Until then, I had been trying to determine whether Vivian had overreacted to a genuine order. Now it looked like there may never have been an order at all. The insurer said keep the lane clear. The board approved a security project. The contractor asked about unfinished fire review. Vivian activated the gate anyway. Then, she told homeowners the fire department required the restrictions. Those were not the same facts. The fire prevention officer contacted me later that afternoon. He asked for the original approved plan, photographs of the current gate, the planter measurements, and the electrical permit number. I sent everything. He asked one more question. Did the gate open automatically for emergency vehicles? I told him I did not know. I had never seen a fire vehicle tested. I had never seen an emergency override demonstration. And I had never been given any documentation showing the system had passed that review. There was a long pause. Then he told me he wanted the gate left exactly as it was until he could inspect it. No one should move the planters. No one should alter the control settings. No one should change the installation before the site visit. That instruction was the first time anyone with actual fire access authority had given me a direct requirement, and it was completely different from everything Vivian had been saying. I forwarded the message to my attorney. Then I checked my email one more time. A new notice from the HOA had arrived. Vivian was scheduling another enforcement hearing against me for repeated interference with emergency access policy. The hearing date was set for the day after the fire prevention inspection. I looked at the notice, then at the folder on my kitchen table. The original site plan, the permitted garage access, the insurance email, the access logs, the contractor specifications, the unfinished emergency review, the board minutes, the missing fire department directive. For the first time, I was not worried about the hearing. I was wondering whether Vivian understood what the actual fire official was about to find when he stood in front of the gate she had been calling mandatory. The fire prevention officer arrived just after 9 the next morning. He did not come with flashing lights. He did not bring a crowd. He parked near the rear court, carried a tablet and a measuring wheel, and started with the original site plan I had sent him the day before. That alone made the whole situation feel different. For weeks, Vivian had treated the words fire safety like a shield. Now someone whose actual job involved fire access was standing in front of the gate. The officer first looked at the rear service court from the public street. Then he looked at the planters. Then the steel gate. Then the distance between them. He measured the clear opening. He compared it with the dimensions on the approved development plan. He walked the turning area. He checked the control cabinet. He asked where the emergency override was located. Nobody from the HOA could give him a clear answer. Management had sent a representative. The gate contractor had sent a technician. Vivian arrived a few minutes later. She was wearing the same dark pink jacket she favored for board meetings, carrying another folder, and she immediately began explaining that the association had installed the system to protect emergency access. The officer did not argue with her. He asked for the fire department directive authorizing the configuration. Vivian handed him the insurance consultant's email. I watched him read it. He went through the entire page. Then he asked if there was another document. Vivian said the insurance recommendation reflected emergency access requirements. The officer asked again whether there was a written directive from his office ordering this specific gate or restricting homeowners from entering their garages. There was a pause. Then Vivian said the HOA had acted proactively. That was the first time I heard her stop saying the fire department had required it. The officer handed the insurance email back. Keeping an emergency lane clear of parked vehicles, he explained, was not the same thing as installing an access control system that changed the approved configuration. He walked back to the gate. The contractor technician opened it. The officer measured again. The planters reduced the usable width compared with the original approved route. Then he asked the technician to demonstrate emergency operation. The technician used the standard control system. The gate opened. Then the officer asked, what happened if normal power failed? The technician explained the backup configuration. The officer asked about the dedicated fire service override. The technician pointed to a section of the control cabinet but then admitted the final emergency interface had not been signed off. Vivian interrupted and said the system had been approved by the contractor. The technician corrected her carefully. The electrical installation had been completed under its permit. That was not the same as final approval of the fire access configuration. I could see the expression on Vivian's face change. Until that moment, she had been able to blur those things together. Permit, approval, safety, emergency access. She had treated them as interchangeable. They were not. The fire prevention officer pulled up the archived plan on his tablet. The rear court had been approved with a defined, clear route and turning geometry. The garages were shown along that route. The new gate installation had introduced physical and operational changes that had not been documented in the file he was reviewing. The planters narrowed the approach. The emergency operation was incomplete, and the city had no record of a directive requiring the HOA to deactivate homeowner vehicle access. Then he asked why the residents had been locked out. Vivian said unrestricted traffic created obstruction risks. I told him I had been fined for entering while the gate was already open for landscapers. The management representative looked down. The officer asked for the HOA's restriction policy. Vivian handed him the board resolution. He read it. Then he asked where the resolution authorized a change to the approved fire access configuration. No one answered. That was the moment the entire argument flipped. For weeks, I had been defending myself against the claim that I was interfering with fire safety. Now the person responsible for reviewing fire access was asking the HOA why its own project did not match the approved setup. Vivian tried to move the conversation back to parking complaints and unauthorized traffic. The officers stopped her there. Those might be legitimate association concerns, but they were separate from whether this physical installation complied with the site's approved emergency access requirements. He was not there to decide HOA policy. He was there to look at the gate. And the gate had problems. Then he asked the contractor technician when the system had been activated. The technician gave him the date. The officer asked whether the company had requested final fire access coordination before activation. The technician said yes. That matched the email I had already obtained. He asked who instructed them to put the system into service before that coordination was complete. The technician hesitated. Then he pulled up the project notes. The activation had been authorized by HOA management after communication with the board president. Vivian said she had been told the remaining items were administrative. The contractor representative did not agree with that characterization. He said the company had specifically flagged emergency operation coordination as outstanding. That was the second major break. The first was that no fire department order existed. The second was that Vivian had pushed the system live after being told part of the fire access review was still unresolved. The officer looked at the planters again, then at the control cabinet, then at the gate. He told management that the system could not continue operating in a configuration that interfered with the approved access route until the required review and corrections were completed. He instructed them to preserve the installation as documented for the official record and coordinate corrective work. Then, he produced a red notice. I did not feel triumphant when he attached it. Mostly, I felt relieved. For weeks, Vivian had used the phrase emergency infrastructure to make every objection sound reckless. Now, the piece of infrastructure she had been protecting was the thing under official restriction. She immediately began asking whether the HOA could continue limiting homeowner access while modifications were reviewed. The officer told her his office was not going to create an HOA access policy for her. His concern was that the approved route remain usable, and that any gate system comply with the required emergency configuration. That answer mattered. He was not handing me a magical victory over the association. He was doing exactly what he had authority to do. He was rejecting the safety justification Vivian had been using for the physical setup. My attorney called me less than an hour later. The inspection record did not resolve every private access question by itself, but it destroyed the central claim behind the fines. The HOA had repeatedly told me resident restrictions were necessary because the fire department required them. There was no such directive. The insurer had only recommended keeping the lane clear. The board had approved a security project. The contractor had warned that final emergency coordination was outstanding, and now the actual fire prevention office had restricted the gate configuration until corrections were made. The hearing Vivian had scheduled against me was still on the calendar for the next morning. But by the time I got home, management sent another email. The hearing had been postponed. My pending fines were placed under review, and the gate contractor had been instructed not to change the control settings without written coordination. For the first time since the project started, the HOA was not telling me what the fire department required. They were asking the fire department what they were actually allowed to do. The gate was still standing. The planters were still there. My access was not fully restored yet, but the most important thing had changed. Vivian no longer controlled the meaning of the word safety. And once that happened, every fine, every lockout, and every board statement built on her version of the story had to survive contact with the actual record. The next 2 days were the first time the HOA had to react to someone else's timeline. The Fire Prevention Office issued a written inspection record. It did not decide HOA policy. or settle private access rights. It simply documented that the gate, planters, and emergency operations setup did not match the approved access configuration closely enough to remain in normal service without corrective review. Management received the notice. So did the contractor and the board. By that afternoon, the gate was no longer operating under Vivian's normal access control rules. The contractor placed the system into a temporary configuration while corrections were reviewed. The planters were scheduled to be moved, and my credential was restored so I could reach my garage. The first time the reader flashed green again, I almost laughed. For nearly 2 weeks, I had been told that entering my own garage threatened emergency safety. Now the same gate had to be restricted because the actual safety authority had concerns about how it was installed. The fines changed next. Management suspended enforcement tied to rear court access. My pending violation was placed on hold. The hearing Vivian had scheduled disappeared from the calendar. Other garage owners began getting their access back too. Then the board called a special meeting. The room was packed. Garage owners came. Residents who had supported the security project came. Even people who had never cared about the rear court wanted to know why association money had been spent on a system that was now under corrective review. Vivian sat at the front in her dark pink suit, but she no longer controlled the room the way she once had. Management presented the inspection record. The contractor representative explained that emergency operation coordination had still been outstanding when the system went live. Then the HOA attorney reviewed the board minutes. The original vote had approved a security access control project. It had not clearly authorized permanent denial of garage access. It had not converted the rear court into an emergency-only lane. And there was no fire department directive requiring the restrictions Vivian had described. One board member asked where that claim had come from. Vivian referred again to the insurer's recommendation. But the recommendation only said the emergency lane should be kept clear of obstructions. It did not order a gate. It did not order homeowner lockouts. Then the access logs were reviewed. My credential had been manually deactivated through the administrator account assigned to the HOA president. So had other garage owners' credentials. Vivian said she was controlling traffic until the project could be stabilized. That answer created another problem. The board had never voted to make garage owners request permission every time they needed vehicle access. Then the contractor produced the email about final fire review. Emergency operation coordination had still been incomplete. The system had been activated anyway. A board member asked who authorized activation. The contractor pointed to management communication. Management pointed to direction from Vivian. For the first time, she had no document that could make the decision look automatic. The inspection record was real. The contractor warning was real. The access logs were real. The board minutes were real. And none of them supported the version she had been telling homeowners. My attorney kept the issue simple. Keeping a fire lane clear was one thing. Operating a compliant gate was another. Using a legally approved garage was another. And claiming the fire department had ordered restrictions when no such directive existed was something else entirely. Once those issues were separated, Vivian's argument collapsed. The board went into executive session. When they returned, the vice president announced 3 immediate actions. Rear access fines tied to the new gate policy were suspended. Garage access would remain restored while the system was corrected, and Vivian was removed from authority over the security and access control project. She was still HOA president that evening, but she no longer controlled the gate. She no longer controlled the contractor, and she no longer controlled the enforcement notices. The next morning, I stood behind my townhouse with the remote in my hand. I pressed the button. The gate opened. I backed my pickup out of the garage for the first time since the lockout began. No security guard stopped me. No violation notice appeared. The only red thing left at the entrance was the official notice attached to the system Vivian had once called mandatory. And by then, the board had started asking a question she could not answer with another safety slogan. Who was going to pay to fix all of this? The money question turned out to be almost as uncomfortable for the board as the gate itself. The contractor submitted a corrective work estimate covering the access control changes, relocation of the concrete planters, emergency operation modifications, and another round of inspection. The board also had to review the fines issued under the policy Vivian had created. Mine was canceled. So were the rear access violations issued to the other garage owners during the lockout period. The HOA sent written confirmation that residents with approved garages would retain practical vehicle access while still being required to keep the designated emergency route clear. That distinction should have existed from the beginning. Do not block the fire lane. Do not park where emergency vehicles need to pass. But using the only approved route into your own garage was not the same thing as obstructing it. The corrected plan removed the configuration that had caused the problem. The planters were moved. The usable opening was restored. The gate system was revised, so emergency operation could be properly reviewed and approved. The board also changed its internal process. Any future project affecting fire access, garage ingress, or emergency routes would require the appropriate outside review before installation went live. Insurance recommendations could no longer be presented to homeowners as government orders unless there was an actual order to show. Vivian's consequences took longer. The board reviewed the contractor emails, credential logs, meeting minutes, and the language she had used in notices to residents. What hurt her most was not one bad decision. It was the pattern. The security project had started as an attempt to deal with theft and unauthorized traffic. Then the fire review was left unfinished. Then the gate went live anyway. Then garage owners were locked out. Then fines appeared. And when people questioned the restrictions, Vivian repeatedly used the fire department as authority for a directive that did not exist. She was permanently removed from oversight of access control and compliance enforcement. At the next special election, she lost the presidency. I never celebrated that part. By then, I mostly wanted the whole thing over. A few weeks later, I came home from work just after sunset. I turned into the rear court and pressed the remote. The light on the reader flashed green. The gate opened. I drove past the spot where the planters had once narrowed the entrance and backed my pickup into the garage. It was an ordinary thing. That was what made it satisfying. No security guard. No access request. No violation waiting in my inbox. Just a homeowner using the garage that had been approved with his property from the beginning. The control panel that once displayed access denied was still there. But every time I looked at it, I remembered what actually changed the case. Not anger. Not a confrontation. Not some dramatic courtroom surprise. The original site plan. The garage permit. The insurance email. The access logs. The contractor warning. The missing fire department directive. And finally, the inspection by the person who actually had authority over fire access. Vivian had spent weeks telling me safety ended the argument. In the end, safety was exactly what exposed it. If an HOA ever tells you that a city, insurer, fire department, or other authority requires something that takes away a right you have been using for years, ask to see the actual document. And if this story reminded you how important that difference can be, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories where paperwork matters more than intimidation.